to this
Sorry.
meeting of the MH Task Force. Uh, so for those who are new, at the last meeting, this is our third meeting of the task force. And some of the main issues that we've been talking about have been utility charges in the mobile home parks, utility reliability, heat-related deaths, evictions, loss of homes. And at the last meeting, we broke up into some subcommittees, and in those committees looked at what could be some steps to address those problems. We did the report back at the end and really trying to take some time today to dive into some of what those next steps are, to really be able to implement some of those changes. There'll also be some time at the end for announcements, but if people want to make announcements or comments before that too, feel free to raise your hand at any point. And if I don't see your hand, since I can't actually see the participants while I'm screen sharing, feel free to just come off mute and speak out loud. A couple accessibility things. We value everyone's participation here. As part of that, we do have the live interpretation, as well as the Google Doc in the link. Let's see, we usually have, okay, I don't see the person who normally takes notes.
I pasted it right in the chat, but I can take notes while you're talking if that's helpful.
That sounds great. Thank you. And then we do have the captions set as well. So if anyone wants to turn the captions on, just know that that feature is available. And with that, we might jump into, well, I guess maybe I'll give space. I know Andrew was going to make an announcement. We'll give space for you to make that announcement first. And then we'll jump into addressing a couple of the issues from the breakouts. Andrew, do you want to give a price?
Certainly. Thank you. Thanks, Ray, and hello, everybody. For those who I haven't met yet, I'm Andrew Paredes. I am the Community Development Administrator with the City of Tucson and working on Tucson's and our partners' receipt of the federal price grant related to mobile and manufactured homes. So I sent out an update to our grantee partners in the middle of this week, but thought it would be a good idea to update this larger group and task force as well. Even since Wednesday, a further update to the grantees. The city has been given access to update our grant in the HUD electronic system, what they call DRGR. That's kind of a next step that allows us to go in and revise our action plan, and revise the budget to fit the final awarded scope of the grant. As you all may know, last year, almost a year ago now, the city applied for and partners applied for a $22 million grant to do a number of things in the mobile manufactured home space, and we're awarded about $11.5 million of grant funds. The next step is for the city to go in and revise its grant application to downsize the budget so that it matches the amount of grant funds we received. That's fairly straightforward. As we all know, in the interim, we've had a change of administration and a whole slew of executive orders that had been issued by the new administration starting in January. And we, 2 weeks ago, received what we were asked by HUD to sign, which is an amendment or an addition to our grant agreement, agreeing to accept additional, I don't even know that there are restrictions, but additional conditions of the grant to align with the administration's new executive orders. This is happening nationwide with all types of federal grants. So this is also nothing new and nothing unexpected. But since we have received the amendment, it outlines a number of things that are to apply, not the least of which for our grant is some kind of restrictions and agreements around immigration law and the promotion of or subsidization of illegal immigration as it relates to the grant funds. That's what HUD has sent to us. Where we are now is it's being reviewed by the City of Tucson's City Attorney's Office to see, if this applies, how it applies, and how the City of Tucson is going to answer this. So it is by no means a beginning or an end. It is simply a next step. Our attorneys are reviewing this to make sure that we are able to still do all of the things, the programs and the initiatives with the Price Grant that we originally applied for and originally were awarded. So that's kind of where we are. Again, unfortunately, another pause in the situation, but wanted to let you all know that this is being reviewed currently by the city attorney's office and city leadership staff. Happy to take any questions. I'm certainly not the city attorney, so I don't know what good answer I can give you, but I can let you know at least what we're doing and what I think the timeline is. Well, you all certainly have my contact info. I'm part of this task force as well. And so feel free if you have any offline questions or curiosities, happy to field them, however you'd like.
Thank you so much. Elise is going to take this next section. Thank you, Elise, for facilitating this. Actually, I'm going to see, Ernesto, would you be willing to share your screen if I send you this link so that I can help with the notes during it?
I'll give it a try.
Okay, great. And everyone has access to this.
If not, I can share from my screen too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you want to share, then I can take notes while you're sharing. Thanks.
Host has participant screen sharing disabled.
Hang on. You want to
Okay, and there's the link to the document again.
yeah.
And while Ernesto's setting Elise up with that, just a review. So again, we talked about a lot of topics at the last meeting, and I kind of distilled them. We were going to do group by group what all the next steps were, but there was a lot of overlap. Like multiple groups talked about the need for accountability in the different areas. So rather than going subgroup by subgroup, we took the two topics that had the most amount of people respond with action items to them, and really trying to take the time at this meeting to go more deeply into those. So Elise is going to walk us through this first issue, which is the unreliability of utility services, especially electric in the summer. And then I'll go through after with the unreliability of utility charges, including people being evicted for utility overcharges. We recognize that there are a lot of other issues people talked about, like the issues with the long wait times for repairs, which if we have to have time at the end, that could be the third topic that we talk about. That would be the next one I would go to. If anyone has anything that you want to drop in the chat that isn't covered in this meeting that we want to make sure that we do get to talk about, I think there may be time for that. With that, we'll pass to Elise.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks everyone for being here. Well, if there is comments in the chat related to while I'm talking, if someone can just interrupt me and like read those comments out, just because I probably won't be perfect at keeping track of the chat while I'm doing. So also feel free to, like, if people have questions, raise your hand, whatnot, or because it's very interactive, I think. So in the left column here, we have some of the solutions or kind of interventions that were discussed in the last meeting. And then next steps and information or people who could help these like goals be realized. And I think we'll go, how I'm thinking I'm going to do this is just to go through everything and like go through everything on a slide and then kind of give people the opportunity to respond or talk or comment, and then move on to the next slide and the next kind of potential solutions. And then we can kind of jump back and forth as needed if people kind of are realizing more things, or I can look in the chat afterwards and incorporate anything else that I meant that we didn't have a chance to talk about it and wrap up at the end. Does that work for everyone? Okay, I don't see any thumbs down, so I'm just gonna go for it. But so the first one that was mentioned was landlord violation of habitability. Tenants are the ones given enforcement rights, and they have the right to sue a landlord, but it's not a fertile area for tenants to get help. How do we fix these enforcement things? And so this is kind of focused on the fact that like these landlord violations of habitability are like, as many people in the room know, designed after kind of like a traditional rental agreement. And they don't account for the fact that moving from a manufactured home can be much more complicated. And so it's unlikely that manufactured home residents are likely to sue or leave their property. And so they then need additional protections. And so in the next steps category, create or collect training materials for tenants on what their rights are, how to track outages, and document these in writing to a landlord, current rights to habitability, and how we can take advantage and how to file complaints with the AG. And so in the second half down here, action on the Attorney General's office, the AG is already responsive to this area, but what can be done to facilitate this process? And so kind of, I think what's being proposed here, which is something that I think a lot of people in this room know a need for, is more trainings and streamlined information around what rights are related to utility outages and how to make complaints against landlords in a way that's productive, because there's a lot of variable entities that you could complain to, some which cost money to complain to, some which don't. But the Attorney General's office is probably the most effective on this issue at this current point, to my understanding. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts on any of this?
I just, one thought is with the housing stability legal advocates, there's a growing number of folks that are being trained in that and certified. And so I wonder if there's also a potential solution in utilizing additional HSLA support specifically focused on this and like doing additional training.
And Ray, you don't want me to be taking notes on the slide while we're doing this, do you?
You absolutely can. And I can support with that too.
Okay, well, we'll just play it by ear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like linking into existing advocate networks, of which there's a lot of knowledge in the room. What else? What other thoughts do people have, or does anyone have a follow-up on what Megan said? Elaine, I see you clapping in agreement.
Oh, well, I meant to raise my hand.
Oh, well, great.
See if this is right. As I understand it, some complaints under current law would go to the Department of Housing, who would they refer them somehow to the courts, or how does that work? The reason I ask is that I understand the Department of Housing may be eliminated. There's no chair of the Department of Housing right now, and it may be continued, I guess, but are we talking about directing people to the AG office instead of going through Department of Housing and I guess justice courts?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you a relatively short answer, and then maybe somebody can type a longer answer in the chat, because there's a lot of knowledge in that. Is that like, this is one of the big issues around manufactured housing, is that it's very unclear who is responsible for governing landlords. There's the Arizona Corporation Commission. There's the Department of Housing, which doesn't have a great rate of response for complaints in what I've heard. And then also that you have to pay $50 to file a complaint there. But recently, the Attorney General's office, I think Frank is here. So Frank, I'm going to speak for you, and then you just tell me when I say something wrong. But like, they've started to actively investigate some landlords who they've received complaints around incorrect utility charges. And so there's a bit of a broader legal power and a broader potential to fine landlords related to those instances. But we rely on having an attorney general who interprets those types of issues as consumer fraud. Fred, do you have anything, or Frank, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's accurate. You know, we are, at least our unit, in consumer protection. We're an enforcement agency, so we enforce the consumer fraud laws. And we have been, looking more creatively about how we can use that law to analyze these issues. I think, as you kind of explained, I mean, there is some oversight by Department of Housing, but for the most part, it's the residents who are the ones who enforce their rights under the current law. And there's not really a regulatory body that is regulating landlords. So, but I can't comment on any current investigations, but we certainly encourage everyone to file complaints with our office. If there are issues that are more urgent, we do try to kind of triage those. If there's like a power outage during the summer, that's something that we try to give greater attention to. And outside of those kind of formal complaint channels, you're certainly welcome to send kind of informal complaints as well. I mean, Ray has reached out to me when there have been issues, and sometimes that's a good way to just put an additional flag on our radar as to problems that are happening.
I noticed in our last meeting, we talked about being sure that the notices to tenants included yields and other legal representation. Is that addressed later, or would that be part of this next steps as far as violations of habitability?
I think let's circle back to that, Elaine. I want to get Nate because he has his hand up, and then
Okay, thank
I think that yields may be a person involved in a lot of these slides, but we'll make sure that's on there. Thank you so much, Elaine. Nate, are you ready?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention in regard to like the training materials. I know the Fair Housing Council locally, they have done similar presentations for topics like tenants' rights when it comes to like emotional support animals and like letters of support for those. And so I just want to present that as like a potential partner who, I don't know if they have materials on this specific subject, but they may be willing to be willing to assist with this or provide trainings like they have on other topics in the past.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
super helpful. Thank you, Nate.
Yes, and they're available on their website. She has a training button that you can go to and get training just, on the web.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. I'm going to go
Mhm.
on to the next slide, and then we'll come back to this as needed. Is that any objections? Any last thoughts? Great. Okay, so this is a legislative proposal of a proposed addition to Arizona Revised Statutes 331434A8. Remedy any interruption of electrical service to tenants within 4 hours of onset of the interruption. If electrical power cannot be restored within this time, the landlord shall provide tenants with commercial graded electrical power until power is restored. I'm just going to make a couple comments on this. This is a tough one. Like, what is the right time period? I think is a huge question. There was an outage in a park that I work with some people in 2 weekends ago, when it was well above 100, and the landlord, there was a lot of back and forth of the landlord being like, well, we don't know. Is it the park or is it TEP? And there's this time to like, when does the clock start? Does it start when TEP says it's not our problem, it's yours? Like, there's all these questions tied up in there. And then of course there's the pragmaticness of like, what could actually make it through the legislature? Is it 4 hours? Is it a different time period? So I don't know if people have thoughts or comments that if your job prohibits you from lobbying for anything, you can make these thoughts or comments in the hypothetical. But I just want to open the floor to any comments on this type of legislative proposal that limits the time that landlords can have, shortens the time that landlords can allow an outage in a sub-metered park. Karina, I know you must have some thoughts on this one.
I'll add a thought or a rhetorical question, but what is the requirement for a traditional landlord? in, in an apartment or a site-built home. And I imagine if this is a shorter time frame, certainly there's increased health risk with regard to, hot or heat, effects in the summer in your manufactured home. But at the very least, perhaps strive to set a standard that is on the same plane as kind of traditional site-built, tenant housing.
Does anyone know, Megan, you have your hand up. I don't know, in direct response or additional?
No, it was an addition. I
Okay.
should know off the top of my head, but I don't. But I did just learn that there is a change for landlords and HVAC, which I guess because this is only land, it wouldn't apply. But I was curious, is this if it's as a result of the park owners' work or like not as it relates to weather or anything else, correct? Because it does seem unreasonable.
That would be very hard to differentiate. My
Yeah.
understanding is that most outages happen when it's hot because most of the homes are, there's also this question, like, the dialogue I've heard amongst landlords is that, these mobile homes are vaulted too low to accommodate window ACs. And so when the electricity goes out in a park, it's the fault of its tenant or multiple tenants running too much power at the same time. So I think it would be very hard to differentiate between weather.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I would then have to argue that that seems incredibly challenging for frankly any landlord to achieve. And so anything being that unreasonable is going to be, well, heavily pushed back on, but also just frankly, I mean, it's really hard. There's not even enough service providers currently with some of the current dynamics to have quick response times. And
Yeah.
so, it almost is one though that maybe even an understanding from TEP of like what's reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, can I pose that question to any manufactured home residents in the room? Like, what would be a reasonable amount of outages to experience in a park before you would feel that the landlord was being negligent? So maybe we need to spend some more time kind of thinking about like what is the
Yeah.
threshold?
I think 8 hours.
Just 8 hours, because like,
Yes.
every 5 to 10 years, my electricity goes out on like my site-built home because of my utility, because something happens, or there is going to be accidents.
Monsoon, I think almost everyone has an outage that often can lead to longer than 24 hours. So that's my fear is like,
Yeah. Ray?
I know this one was a suggestion that we got from the ASU work around heat resilience. I wonder about one next step being inviting them to one of our future meeting to talk about how they came up with this one, how this compares with other things. I have to imagine that this is about power outage in the park itself, not like once there's utility coming to the master meter, but then not going to the rest of the park. But it'd be good to be clarity on that, because if it's not, it might be saying, but they need a backup plan. You have a population, often a lot of seniors. If it's not going to be responded to, I saw there was a comment in the chat about, well, do they have a cooling center? Is there a community center on site where they could have a backup generator? Because it's not saying, right, that if it cannot be restored in that time, there has to be a backup plan.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to talk to the ASU folks about coming to a future meeting and really diving deep into that part of the.
And I just want to add that reading what is the threshold for negligence, 8 hours. I feel like I know this happens mostly over the summer months, but it happens like the whole year too. Even it might be like less frequent, but I mean the threshold, I feel like you cannot say 8 hours because it's not the same to say 8 hours at 110
Right.
or 8 hours at 80.
Yeah.
Right.
So I feel like those thresholds should be like broken down by a range of temperature, right? Because of course, if it's hotter outside, then they need like to do something
Right.
more,
Fast.
urgent, right? Faster,
Yes.
of course. And I just want to mention, even in apartments, right? So last week, they were doing some repairs in one of my friend's apartments, and they let them know that they were going to turn off the AC, not the whole electricity, just the AC was not going to work. It's an old apartment building complex where it's just like they're the ones that run the whole thing, the AC, so you don't get to turn it on or turn it off whenever you want. And something happened. They let them know that the AC was going to be off, and then they were not able to make it work, or they were not able to fix it. So they were basically 2 days without AC. And I think like those situations also happen, but again, nobody knew what to do if they needed to go somewhere, right? And then again, most of the centers, the cooling centers, are open during the day, not at night, even like our community-based ones. So it's that question always comes back to mind, and we never know what to do until we're under that situation. So it's very hard to tell people what to do or where to look for that information. So having a backup plan, definitely. But then that's the other thing. So if it's going to be overnight, or if it happens at night, usually you just call like the emergency number if they have one, right? So they'll try to figure that out. But I'm sure that the office, or if it's big enough to have like a common area, it's probably going to be closed, right? Yeah. So those are like my 2 cents. Like, for the threshold to think what's good or bad, I think like you would also need to break that down by temperature, like different thresholds of temperature to add or yeah to see the length of when to take action or what to do, things like that.
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, so I feel like this is a lot to chew on, and maybe
Yeah.
we need to come back to this in the name of time. But I think also, just because there's a lot of stuff here, that means there's a lot of ideas around it. And I think one thing that's come out for me that I probably need to add is that, like, how can we like help parks utilize that community space? I mean, so many parks do have some indoor community space, and utilize those as a kind of like a buffer in the case of these events. Which many of which should happen less than they do. Okay, on to the next one.
Can I make a quick interruption? We had a
Yeah.
comment that the interpretation, they're not able to hear the audio super well. I'm not sure if you can get any closer to the mic. That's breaking up some. Thank you.
So this next solution, added protections for master metered customers. At this point, people on master metered utilities are not protected by the Arizona Corporation Commission, utility companies themselves, or the Arizona Department of Housing, without going through a legal lengthy court process. Master metered utilities need oversight and accountability. And so just some context, which most people in the room probably know, is that many parks are master metered. And so the park owner pays money to the utility and then owns any meters that exist within the park. Investigate each potential, and so under next steps, it says investigate each potential agency that could provide oversight, and what would it take to oversee both the utility service and reliability. Potential agencies include the Arizona Corporation Commission, utility companies, Arizona Department of Housing, licensing parks, or other entities. And I think that like accountability could take many forms. Like park owners could just be required, like, to report when there's an outage. And if there's a lot of outages, then they lose their license or are asked to, like there's a lot of potential here that isn't that shouldn't be too politically challenging for the public to wrap their head around, I think. Any comments or thoughts on this, on regulating master metered, specific regulations involving master metered parks? I see a chat maybe coming up. I think our long-term, so Elaine says, I think our long-term goal has to be to eliminate master meters at mobile home parks, especially since the enforcement of fraud is so uncertain. The Attorney General's office can only do so much. I believe this is the only real solution.
I agree. We have to work towards that.
Megan, go ahead, but talk slow. And then after Megan, let's go Ray, just because I'm going to write down some notes. So just don't go too fast.
I would agree with the comment about the long-term goal. I do wonder if there's current data around sort of misuse at mobile home parks versus other landlords that could be documented to substantiate sort of the need for the oversight. Because like even reading the article, a lot of it comes down to incorrect billing, and then it's deemed as like errors, which feels like there needs to be a like greater recourse put in place for errors.
Exactly.
And or larger accountability to the reduction of errors going forward.
So let me just follow that up with a question to Frank real fast, and then Ray will get to you. Is that okay? Frank, is there a way to see statistics on how many people are making these types of complaints in manufactured homes versus other types of housing? I know that wouldn't be like the perfect data that we're imagining, but it might give some ideas about how rampant a problem it is.
And are you referring to the complaints that our office receives?
Yeah, like Attorney General complaints.
I don't think we have that kind of data.
Okay.
I mean, it's possible that we could create it somehow, but it's not like I can just pull up a report right now and tell you how many complaints we have in this one area versus, with apartment buildings.
Okay, thanks.
Can I add one sub comment to that? It might also be as simple as having a very simple report process. So adding a report of, incorrect utility billing to the website, the Department of Housing website, that just starts to track this and have a better handle of it.
Yeah, if people have thoughts on that, put them in the chat. I think that's a good point, Megan. Ray, tell us what you're thinking.
Thanks. Well, I absolutely agree with, regulation on master meters and getting rid of them. But I also know that there's going to be so much pushback because a lot of the mobile home parks are not in great shape. It's going to be costly. But I wasn't sure if people here knew that TEP is having a conversation about changing how they offer conversions to the different parks. They're talking about, instead of parks having to pay upfront for all of the facilities to convert them to individual meters, that they're talking about having them do an initial upfront and then pay over time. But for one park that already converted, it was like $300,000. And so but the cost is not supposed to go to the tenants. But how many mobile home park owners and managers are going to go for that? So I love the idea, but I don't know that unless we're forced to, I don't see that happening. But I also wanted to find out if is Step Up to Justice part of this? Because they do have an education program on mobile home parks and protections for tenants. And so I commented, but I wasn't sure if they're already invited or if they're even here today. So I just thought I'd throw that out. Oh, sorry, I was saying that much too quickly. Step Up to Justice.
Step Up to Justice has been invited. They haven't come to a meeting yet. But if anyone else would like to talk with them, I've spoken with one of their attorneys and have messaged a number of their staff, because they do have that mobile home park asset protection program. But again, they haven't participated here yet. I did want to look at, one of the later slides is going to talk about focusing on eliminating master meters. But this slide here, I think this idea of what it would take for each of those entities to take more accountability, like what it would look like for the Corporation Commission or for the utility companies or for the Department of Housing to license parks, to make sure we don't skip over that conversation too. So it really is still in this limbo space where there isn't an agency that is reliable or is accountable to this. Do folks have any thoughts on what might be some next steps for, say, for example, of the Corporation Commission starting to have oversight over master meter utilities? Again, even if we're trying to eliminate them in the long term, that's not going to happen with all the parks today.
Any thoughts in response to that? I guess there's a couple questions tied up in there. Is like, I think like, would it, to clarify who would be, if this system were to change where there's more direct accountability to a specific state agency, would that, how would like, would that need legislation? Would it just need advocacy to the governor? Yana, you have your hand up. What are you thinking?
I guess just like as an informational point, I think learning about what California did was really interesting. They have kind of, it seems like the state takes some of that money on, the utility pays for construction, and then there's like extra things that the park might pay for, but no one is carrying the full cost. And they also have like a dispute resolution body, and it's all pretty centralized. I don't know a ton more beyond what's in the story, but that just seems like the most comprehensive one I've seen around conversions and utility disputes as well.
Yeah, and we do have some slides on that we'll get to. Thanks, Yana. Any additional thoughts on this? So like on the broader conversation around like having a more streamlined state agency responsible for regulating these things. Ray, is that an a decent summary of kind of what you're hoping to achieve out of this discussion?
Yeah, I think it's one of the conversations we keep circling around is that no entity, a lot of say they're not responsible, but we don't have an entity that is. And for me, that next question is, well, what would it take for any of these entities to be responsible? If the Corporations Commission made an active decision that they wouldn't oversee third-party utilities and that it would lay in this limbo stage. So my next question there is, well, what would it mean for the Corporation Commission to oversee them? Why did they make that decision? And what, I think it was back in 1970 maybe, and what would that oversight look like if they were to take place? I think it might be a legislative change to give them that power. Yeah, wondering if anyone has any ideas there, if we might have it as a next step, like meeting with the Corporation Commission and saying, we know that you're not responsible, but yeah, what would it take there?
I see a lot of stuff in the chat. Alan, what are you thinking?
Well, I don't really know anything about this. It's an area I'm unaware of. Who has responsibility for third-party master metering? But it occurs to me it probably does require legislation. I do think the ACC does have jurisdiction, if that's the right word, over utilities, but I think it's mostly like rate setting and the like. I don't know if their jurisdiction extends to oversight like this. It might, again, I don't know. What would I do if I had a client that came to me and said, this is something I want you to do? I would research it, and also because of where I work, I have access to the Morris Institute for Justice in Phoenix, and they might know something about it. And if there is legislation that could be proposed, they might be willing to do that. So I'm going to, send them an email and see if they know anything about this issue, and maybe can provide some support.
Thanks, Alan. That's very thoughtful. Andrew, I know you have experience in Colorado, and so I'd love to hear.
Sure, a couple different things. First, as we were talking about this, I quickly went to the ADOH site, and you can see where they require certain licenses or tell park owners that you need a license if you're doing a septic tank, you need a license if you're doing a generator. Seems like if you, the landlord, are acting as a power provider, you're that middle 100 yards from TEP to the units, you may, just simple as requiring a license to be a power provider. And at least that provides some sort of oversight. And there could be lots of reporting that goes into that oversight. Financial accounting for your TEP bill versus your pass through, 17 individual sites, and make sure that you're charging only what you're paying. And then secondly, yes, where I came from in Colorado, an entire mobile home park oversight program was established from scratch. So a lot, very similar to what we're talking about here for Arizona, starting in 2019. So it ramped up from nobody doing it to a department, and might be a good model for an advocacy group to look into. It started with legislation at the State House in 2019, and probably the makeup of Colorado's size, maybe even kind of political balance back then, was kind of similar to Arizona. So it might be a good model for, the type of legislation that got passed through maybe a similarly balanced legislature.
Thanks, Andrew. That's super helpful. Alan, back to you relatively quickly, and then I'd like to wrap up the next couple slides before the hour so that we have plenty of time to do the second section.
Sorry, my hand was raised from me forgetting to lower it last time I raised it, so I don't have anything more.
Thanks.
Could I jump in just for a
Yeah,
second? Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand on here, but on
don't
Alan's point, I just wanted to point out that it may require a legislative change. It may also require a change to the state constitution. Arizona is one of the only states I know of where the utility regulator gets its powers. They're identified in the state constitution, and so the state constitution says that the Corporation Commission can regulate public service corporations, and that phrase public service corporations has been interpreted to mean utility companies that are providing a service to the public at large. And as I understand it, and I'm not a legal scholar in this area, but the Arizona Supreme Court has said, well, mobile home parks are only providing utilities to a small group of people, not to the entire public. And so they don't fall within that definition. So, it may be the case that the Corporation Commission would be the best agency to regulate in this space, but there would need to be some big changes made to kind of the structure of government.
This would be a big thing, but I think it could be a really cool thing. So it may be worth trying to spend some capital on. Any quick last thoughts to follow up on what Frank said or on the issue before I move on to the next slide?
I do have a question for Frank. There is, you said, an Arizona Supreme Court case that addresses mobile home parks and utilities?
Yeah, I think it's, let me see if I can find it real quick. I think it's ACC versus Nicholson from the early 1970s.
Frank, will you mind sticking that in the chat if you find it?
Yeah,
Great. Thank you.
I'll put the citation to that.
Thanks, Frank.
Awesome. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Okay, so this is a slide that's like an ongoing theme, and I think a lot of the conversations we're having around different issues surrounding manufactured housing. And that's just ownership models that incentivize investment in utility infrastructure. And so that the idea that like part of the reason there's these utility struggles in a lot of parks is that the utilities within the park haven't been invested in, because the math that the landlords, park owners are following does not incentivize them to invest in those utilities. And that's of course not all parks, and so these are some different ownership models that are a little underrepresented in Arizona, but do exist in large numbers in other areas of the country. Public ownership of distressed parks, licensing of parks, taking licensing away for violations. That's not an ownership model, but it is like saying like kind of hinging people's private property rights to say that like if you're going to operate as a landlord, you do need to agree with more rules or follow them actually. Community land trusts that own parks, and then of course resident-owned communities. So next steps in terms of this, I'm just going to put right to purchase legislation up here, because that's legislation that allows parks to have the first a time period in which residents have a time period in which they can purchase a park. This is legislation that has gotten through Montana's very Republican legislature, then to get vetoed by our governor multiple times. But just to say that there are like broad arguments that this legislation can be passed under, that people identify with. Does anybody have any other thoughts or comments on any of these ownership models or on right to purchase or
Yeah. I'll just add to that again, coming from my experience. When Colorado passed its law, it included certainly right of first refusal, the option to purchase not only by tenants, but that tenants could assign their right to a community organization or nonprofit, which enabled nonprofits or land trusts to also step in and purchase the park on behalf of tenants or to ensure long-term affordability. And that was a pretty powerful change to that legislation to allow tenants to assign their right in exchange for affordability to a nonprofit.
My understanding is that we are working on that with AMHO and our lobbyist.
Thanks, Kim. That's helpful. That's good for me to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very interested in that. So anyone else have thoughts? And if you don't have your video on, still free to pipe in. Like if you don't know how to raise your hand, just take your mark off and talk. Like feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so not much to say on this one, but I do think it's an important one, and maybe its simplicity is perhaps the reason for not much discussion rather than its unimportance. So this is the last slide that I added that wasn't necessarily directly discussed, but I just wanted to create a space to talk about some community-based non-legislative responses to some of these issues. I think I'm pretty interested in there being some sort of outage response network within Tucson, where people have a number they can call if their park experiences an outage. And it just is a network that can then do, after, like a certain period of time, door-to-door checks within the park. Some activities, it also might be a way to keep track of outages and which parks are experiencing a ton of them, which might be useful when thinking about regulation down the line. Utility checking and AG complaint workshops. I think that I talked to a lot of people who are really interested in this. And I would love to like partner with people to have more materials to share. And then manager outage training. So the Manufactured Homeowners Park Owners Association provides their managers with required training that's required by the state. So the state does not have direct control over that training, but it seems like there's potentially some opportunity to be asking managers to go door to door during outages and check on people and some activities like that. And then also like, is this an issue we should be working on landlords with? That's a question that I am curious what people think about. So maybe 5 minutes, if anyone, or maybe a little bit more. Ray, please feel free to stop this discussion whenever you need to, but if anyone has any comments or thoughts or concerns on any of these issues.
Well, I have a thought. And I know it wasn't an outage, but people die every day. And sometimes you don't see someone for 30 days and you ask your manager, this is the quote, Yana, that I forgot to share with you. Someone asked the manager if she does wellness checks. And she said, it's not part of my job description. So that would be no, we don't care about you. So asking a manager to walk around during an outage, I don't think she'll do it. Because it's not part of her job description. But if we had it in there, I guess it would be. Yeah. But there's no one, that you can complain to say that they're not doing their job, because right now that's where we're at. Nobody to talk to about them not following the law. And they all know it, and they all break the law because of it.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah. I mean,
yep.
Any other thoughts? Outage response network? Any thoughts about what that type of thing might look like in Tucson or elsewhere? Andrew, you've got your mic off.
Yeah, I'm thinking, maybe it goes beyond that. I hear what Kimberly was just talking about, and I think, I guess, as I put myself in the shoes of that employee, they may very well just be sticking to what's in their job description, and, good or bad, it's hard to force someone to do something that they can't or don't have to. But broader to that, thinking around this idea of, outreach and education around a broad variety of topics, tenant outreach or community outreach, encouraging residents to kind of organize themselves and understand what it's like to be a good neighbor and how that can benefit not only the life and death situation when it's 111 outside, but also just general upkeep, maintenance, watching out for your place while you're not there, and vice versa. Really trying to, grassroots wise, not legislative or changing the law, just educating groups on how they can, organize and the benefits of, and how to get your neighbor who you might not know to want to, to be in the neighborhood association or whatever. Again, thinking of, there's no requirement that I go down the way here and knock on the door of all my neighbors, or if I was a landlord in an apartment building. But certainly I would like to live in a community where people did that for each other and noticed a big flood coming off a roof and would knock on that person's door to help them out. So I don't know, I just said a lot without saying anything, but I feel like it goes into this greater outreach and inform our communities of best practices bucket.
Yeah. Yeah, Andrew, I think it's there are networks already existing within these parks, and how do we strengthen those and support people who are creating those networks and who are help them thrive, give them resources that will help those networks.
I do like your idea of working groups with landlords.
Well, Kim, if you know any landlords that want to work, send them my way.
Yeah.
I do have a question if I can jump in. When a park resident has an outage and calls TEP, I've got an outage, doesn't TEP do something with that information, or what do they do?
That's a good question. I have one example, but Ray, maybe you might have more, or some other folks from Proto Costas Mobilis.
Everything I've heard when people have called us after they've called TEP, TEP says it's not our problem. We're sub-metered, and I'd love to hear if anyone has different experiences, but I have not had TEP respond to anyone who has had a sub-meter utility. They may have a check on your neighbor program, but they're not checking on their customers when their customers are not direct.
So is the distinction perhaps that the outage is not to the park, but to something individual in the park? And that means the TP is not involved in it.
Yeah, we're exclusively generally talking about people where the outage is at the park level. If the outage is out in the neighborhood and everyone has lost power and they lost power to the master meter, that I don't think any of the situations that we're talking about is that. I think people understand like there's an outage in that neighborhood. We're exclusively, I think, talking about when it's the fault of the park. So
Yeah.
others the time.
I think it can be a little convoluted, like the park, there was an outage in a park a couple weeks, that I was talking about a couple weeks ago, and it was only half of everybody's trailer. So for example, people who had 2 AC units were doing much better than people who had an AC unit on the side where it was out. And it was what I understood from the conversations I had with people after the outage was a TEP. Like they called their landlord, who then called TEP, and then the landlord essentially said, we'll find out if it's TEP's problem or not. And once we find out that, then we'll go from there. And it was fixed by TEP. I don't know all the details. Megan?
Can I ask a clarifying question then? Is there, I mean, at that point, wouldn't it be the responsibility to some extent on the city as an inhabitable situation? So like it sounds like if, you know, hard to determine, is it an issue of TEP having electricity to the park versus if it's from the park to the units, but then I would wonder if it does fall into some level of concern as like, because I'm guessing it's related to old infrastructure and, you know, there's a lot of stuff there, but that does feel like it's crossing this line of potential risk. Yeah.
Yeah, so like where does, yeah, go ahead, Ray.
I think it's a great suggestion is because sometimes it's like, who else would be responsible? Like habitability is a real issue. Do you have thoughts on who at the city of Tucson we might talk with? That to me seems like an important next step is like, we're a city commission, we're at least partially under the city of Tucson Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. We have that direct relationship with the city. Feels like there might be openness to at least having a conversation, even if they're going to say that it's not their job. Is it code enforcement or?
That was I don't know. I can think about it though, but maybe someone else does.
I'm also not sure. This is Rachel.
Code enforcement is definitely something to consider. It can be, as most people probably know, a double-edged sword, because if they come out and find some problem that requires condemnation even, people will be forcibly removed from their homes, even though they're just trying to fix a problem. So it's not an easy thing to suggest to people if that kind of thing happens. You know, if there's wiring, loose wiring hanging out for their mobile home, their mobile home could be condemned. I've heard about it happening. But it does seem like, you know, if the park isn't doing things right and they're not providing proper service on the utilities, code enforcement might do something.
Thanks, Alan. That's helpful and concerning.
And there's a lot of parks like that are not under, they're
No
not.
question. And a lot of mobile homes, you know, like the 30% of mobile homes are, you know, older than 1976 tells me there's really probably serious electrical hazards going on right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see them.
code enforcement comes out, they could just be excluded from their home that way.
So
Yep.
maybe this is an area where we have to tread a little bit lightly to see if what options are possible.
Mhm.
Is there anyone from the city who might be willing to like ask some questions or poke around a little bit?
Hi, this is
Certainly,
I've been
Fatima.
in a,
Hi, Fatima.
If you send me the list of questions, I'm happy to try to find answers for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I was just going to say I've been in meetings. It's been a little while where a code enforcement employee, I don't know what their job title is. I remember her name was Colleen Bigman. Don't know why I remember the name, but she came and spoke to a group of tenants. It wasn't mobile homes; it was apartment tenants. Very nice, well-meaning. If anybody has contact with her, or I wouldn't know how to get a hold of her. I think if I remember, I tried to get a hold of her and all I could find a general code enforcement email. So with that, somebody who might want to come to a meeting like this and talk wouldn't surprise me.
Megan, Alan, would you guys mind putting some like more explicit questions in the chat, and then Ray or I can compile them for Fatima around habitability and like that? I don't know exactly how to phrase it. Okay, I think that is the last slide before we move on to problem 2. But there's this beautiful blank space. Is there any solutions that we haven't talked about? And there'll be more opportunities to talk about this in the second section. So I don't want to spend, if you don't think of them in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to move on. Great. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Ray. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for facilitating that, Elise. This next session, they're really similar issues, so I think that we're going to be running up with some of the similar solutions. This is about the mobile home park residents being evicted for fraudulent utility bills. Like we know there's the high utility bills that are based off of the inefficiency of units. We're going to get into that in the next meeting. I think let's decide what will be the important, but this is over like actual incorrect bills that are continuing without the enforcement. Is this zoomed in enough that people can see it? Try to zoom in a little more. I think. Oops. I want to make sure that
Looks fine to me, Ray, but
okay.
just to comment, you can, if you bring your mouse over next to your picture, you can enlarge or shrink your picture, your image, and increase the size of the shared document.
Okay, I'll turn to slideshow. I don't think I can edit it on this.
That works better.
Okay, great. So one is, would someone be willing to enter these in as we go into the document? I still can't edit it while I'm slide sharing. One potential solution we talked about was better preparing tenants to win their cases. And because some of that needs to happen before someone's getting an eviction notice. So we talked at the last meeting about preparing a packet of training materials on what rights are, but also with simple documents on tracking utilities, of writing down the starting and ending readings every month, of saving bills, of a quick training on how to complain to a landlord, since a lot of people are making complaints orally. They're either making a phone call or they're going to the office, and recourse to address the issues if the landlords are not. I know there are some groups that are already doing some of these trainings. I don't know of a group that's explicitly doing a training with materials on how to track for utility issues. They'll open it up there to see if anyone has ideas of how we might make that happen. I don't think it'd be a huge jump to prepare these materials to include within the existing Know Your Rights trainings that's happening, but do you think something specific on utilities? Let me see, you're off mute.
So, right, yeah, this is something I think we could do, either I or Skylar Clark, I thought was gonna be here, and he's not, that I can see. Can do the trainings or provide the materials. It isn't hard. I think I could probably do it off the top of my head without looking, although I would still look, but it isn't hard. But you raised an extremely important issue, is to make sure when you do, you know, speak to your landlord about some habitability issue, especially the utility charges, that you document it in writing and save a copy of it. It's okay to talk to them, but do, you know, follow up every time. You know, property managers rotate around all the time. And if you don't have a record of what you spoke to the previous property manager, they're not going to believe it ever happened. You won't be able to show it.
Do any of the existing organizations, like the AG's office, do you have any materials already that you give to tenants to track utilities that we might include in that?
I don't think that's something that we've created, but you know, we do create consumer education materials every once in a while. There's a few people in Phoenix who are kind of more involved with that, but I can raise this issue with them. I know just recently we're doing a public awareness campaign with the BBB, Better Business Bureau, as to just other consumer fraud. But I say that because, you know, perhaps we could partner with SALA or other organizations to get some of this education out. Because I agree, like, knowing how to read your meter, writing down the monthly readings and making written complaints, that's all very important.
I and AMHO will help.
So that Casas Mobiles could be on board with that too. Yeah.
All right, I'll contact some people after this meeting in Phoenix and see if that's something we could get started.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's something that maybe with one meeting we could get together and then to distribute throughout the Housing Stability Legal Advocate Network as well. That suggestion was made earlier. Great. See if I can move to the next slide here. Another solution is that I'm glad we have all these legal service providers here to talk about supporting winning under the existing law. We're going to have more slides after this about changing laws. With the laws that currently exist, it's a fast process. Evictions are fast processes. If people haven't done the prep work before they're going to court and they're prepping once they start with the eviction notice, how to make sure that the legal service providers are ready to respond to that. I know Alan or other legal service providers, if you have anything, Cassandra is in the meeting as well.
Okay, yeah. So to respond to that, you know, the part about it being prepared to respond, I think that's probably true. Every case is different, so I can't say I'm ready for every case, but just generally, we understand the issues and are ready to respond. And things do happen fast. So having our system requires that you qualify for our services. And if it's a case that involves housing, especially something as significant as a potential eviction, I think it would qualify, but that isn't always my call. It's part of my call. And you have to qualify on an income basis too. And then also qualify on proper documentation for legal status in the country. Assuming all those things can be met, we are ready to go.
Okay, I'm just gonna interrupt real fast. Monica says that the translation, she can't hear it again.
I'm happy to repeat if I was one that she wasn't able to do.
So maybe I'll just echo Ray's previous call for the translator to speak more directly in the microphone, or I don't know.
Do I need to repeat?
Yeah, Alan, why don't you just repeat a summary of what you said, and then I'll check with Monica to see if it is working better.
Okay, so I'm responding to Ray's, the thing that's on the screen about winning cases in court under existing laws. And we, you know, Southern Arizona Legal Aid is is an entity that is prepared to respond to these issues. There are some, and it does happen fast. The eviction process is by law meant to go really, really quickly. So when tenants get something that involves an eviction, if they want us to help them, they need to apply to us for our services immediately. And they have to qualify for services, which means based on income, on the type of case. If it's an eviction, it should be okay. And also, we have, unfortunately, we're federally funded, and that limits us to providing services to people that have legal status in the country, citizenship or otherwise.
Since Sala is particularly prepared to take these cases, I'm wondering about when people are referred through EELS, if there are ways of having those conversations beforehand with attorneys who are ready for those, to have some of those cases being referred to people who want to take a utility overcharge case and are ready to take those. Oh, you're on mute, Alan.
I think I tapped my space bar by mistake. So there isn't any way to call us and get legal advice until you're a client. So I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but just somebody who calls and says, I've got this problem, I want you to be prepared for it. It doesn't really help us to do that. They need to go through the process that we have, which is applying. If there's an eviction case pending, they'll get through our system pretty quickly. Part of the one barrier is because of our infrastructure, our phone system just is not very good. Maybe one day it'll be improved, but right now it's not. So you call, you get put on hold. Sometimes you disconnect, you have to call again. And there's limited hours when we take calls like that. They just have to keep trying. And I apologize profusely for the fact that that's true, but it is how it works. And again, if someone were to call me and say, I've got this problem on utilities and I need help, and can you help me? Or can you give me some preliminary advice or something like that? I can't give them any advice if they're not my client, which they wouldn't be. And my answer every time is you need to call intake and get a case.
Does anyone have thoughts about proactive lawsuits beyond eviction defense too? Like the eviction defense is so fast, but there are other avenues when someone is not being evicted. I know Sala's working on some of that now.
We have not really proceeded with that, Ray. I know what you're talking about, of course. And that would be like a consumer fraud lawsuit where we would commence a litigation against a mobile home park for consumer fraud for them overcharging for utilities. And I'm interested in doing that. It's just been something that I haven't gotten to do. But I want to do that, and I'm sure Skylar would also. And I have Anthony Young, who's our executive director. He's interested in it. We just have to do it. And that will best would be if there's a tenants union or tenants organization of some sort in a mobile home park or otherwise that wants to be involved in that kind of case. To have an individual come to us is less interesting to us than having a group of tenants come to us.
Thank you. Maybe one next step too would be then to talk through what are the things that you'd be looking for in that kind of case, so that as through our network, whether it's at Pima Council on Aging gets a lot of calls, AMHO, whether Casas Moviles, that we could say this is a case that has those elements that you would need.
Yes. Maybe separately, we should try to schedule a meeting with those groups and us to see if we can kind of narrow it down like you just suggested, which is a good suggestion.
Letting me move forward to the next screen. The next slide is
Ray, I think your shift key is stuck down or something.
Uh,
Do you want me to share the slide? And then
sure, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Can everyone see?
Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, this next one was Frank's suggestion. Frank, I don't know if you are still on, if you wanted to share anything about building relationships with utility companies.
Honestly, I'm trying to remember what I previously said about this. With and I'm sorry, I
No.
don't recall, but I think what I remember, I know there was a transcript from an eviction hearing that Ray had sent to me and I had reviewed, and there were concerns about the complaint that the tenant had was, the utility charges were wrong, but the eviction judge just said, well, this is all hearsay. I don't have the bills in front of me. I don't know I don't know what the rates are supposed to be. And so perhaps, is that what you're referring to, Ray? That we had talked about how could you improve just the evidence that you bring to court? And one possible way would be to have someone from the utility company explain the rates that can be charged, and then look at the bills and compare whether those two track. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that, and for them to be willing to speak in court, or at least to share something that could be used in court.
Right.
Because some of the documentation that's brought to court, they wouldn't admit because it's not notarized or officially coming. They're calling it hearsay.
And there are some utility companies that have been very helpful. I mean, I can't speak about TAP or anything, but I know like the Flowing Wells Irrigation District has been very cooperative. And I'm sure there are other municipal providers that would do the same. Or I would hope so.
Any cost for them to do that, Frank? I mean, it seems like a pretty big burden to have somebody spend part of a day testifying in court.
That's fair. I guess what I have in mind is at least just, I mean, if you could get a declaration or something that explains the rates, that would be a start. But I mean, I agree, having someone come into court on a moment's notice with how fast these proceedings move,
There's that too.
Yeah, that'd be challenging.
It could be. In the case that you were referring to, as I understood it from Ray, there was publicly available information that described the rates, and the thought is that by judicial notice, the court could take evidence of that. It's another way around the issue, maybe.
Yeah, good point.
Even asking, one part of this on the next step is asking each of the utilities for a one-page handout of how to calculate the charges, because it can be confusing to try to read off their website. Most of them are not as simple of like, this is how many kilowatts you use, this is what the charge should be. So talking to each utility of getting that material so that we could share that with people in the parks as we're doing the trainings.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand with my screen on either, but this is interesting because this is something when I talked to the Spectrum people back in May, that they also complained about having trouble finding correct utility rates, that they were actually asking landlords to send them their bill and then get those rates back, like from the landlord bill, which just seems kind of insane. So I wonder if it would make sense if this is something that you could take to the utility commission, as just being like that they have to publish a declaration every month or every quarter of what their utility rates are. And that perhaps it wouldn't be that controversial, but might make it really easier to contest some of these. cases. I don't know.
And Monica said in the chat that in many of the trail or the mobile homes, there's only 1 meter for all the mobile homes, and it doesn't say how much electricity they're using. Maybe that can be one of the things that's being addressed too. I know the AG's office has written to some of the parks, I believe, that are not giving a bill with itemized charges, because it is required that they're providing that itemized bill, and it seems like that's not in compliance. If anyone wants to share more about that. See Elise, you shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding from the landlord training that I went to in May is that that's not in compliance. But I'm not a lawyer, but that like, yeah, I would have to look at my notes, but I'm pretty sure that, Monica, that is not, that laws are being broken.
Frank, do you know if you've had success with that when you're notifying people that they need to provide an itemized bill? That seem like a reliable way to respond?
You know, I don't want to get too far into specifics on, you know, individual parks that we've contacted or that are under investigation. You know, parks in general have been receptive and they want to comply with the law, at least they say so. And so I'm hopeful that in the near future, you know, we will see more compliance and that there will be some deterrence component there. But there are a lot of parks all around the state. There are a lot of different owners. I think Mark has talked about this, you know, it's very heterogeneous. There's some, you know, these companies that own 50, 60 parks, and then there's a lot of mom and pop parks out there. And so whether we'll see compliance across the board in the near future, I kind of doubt that. But we do hope to see progress.
Thank you. If we can go to the next slide, Elise. Support opportunity for park residents to become direct utility customers. Okay, we have talked about that. And the next slide here is a link to the California pilot program to move to from master meter to sub-metered service. I'm wondering if between now and the next meeting, if some of us might try to meet with the California folks to hear about how their program has gone and what they might suggest for if this were to happen again. Does anyone have interest in trying to set that up or wanting to be a part of that?
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kim, it might be kind of nice if it came from AMHO.
Yeah.
Great. Great. I put you as a next step for that.
Okay.
Thanks. Go to the next slide. So requiring the master meter parks to report the aggregate of what they charge. And this is another question of who would be responsible to that. Right now, you know, the electricity comes into the park and they know how much electricity is being delivered because TEP will put that on a bill, but there's no place where the park has to say back, like, okay, you charged us 1,000 kilowatts and we charged our residents 900 kilowatts because we have, you know, 100 for the clubhouse and things. There's no transparency on that. And the utility companies will often not give residents the total bill because they say it's a privacy issue. But not having that transparency, not having any accountability, not being able to say this is the aggregate of what is charged, leaves for that that lack of accountability. So wonder about what might be possible in terms of whether it's a condition of a utility for providing a master meter service of saying like, okay, but you have to report back to us how much you charge your residents. Or maybe this would fall under that conversation with the Colorado of if there's a mobile home oversight committee, that they would have to provide the bills there to have some kind of transparency. I'm not sure if people have thoughts on this initially. This might fall into those earlier conversations that we had. I do wonder about the residents being able to get access to the bill of the park, because I think they talk about it as a privacy issue, but if they are a resident at that address, if people have any thoughts on how they might have the right to that bill. Now we can move on to the next slide. Which, yeah, this is one of the suggestions from the subgroup that I wasn't there for, but this conversation about no eviction for unpaid utilities. I imagine that that would mean a change to the Arizona Mobile Home Park Landlord Tenant Act. But I wonder if any of the legal folks in the room might say something about what this would take.
So evictions involve rent, and utilities aren't rent unless the tenants agreed that it's rent in the lease. So they might there might be damages owed the landlord for failure to pay utilities that are required to be paid, but without it being tied to rent, somehow the eviction can't go on just unpaid utilities. And I'm saying that because that's absolutely the case with residential landlord, apartment buildings and homes. And I'm less familiar with mobile homes because I don't get as many of those cases, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going to say the same thing. So I found the right statute here.
It does seem that almost all the parks that I've seen that charge utilities from master meter parks, where the park is charging for the utilities, include it as rent.
So if that's the case, then the eviction can go. And so what you said earlier is true, that it would require a statutory change. Or some kind of litigation claiming it's unconstitutional and have it by some senior judge somewhere ruling that it's not possible. And that's really unlikely.
I wonder what might be next steps for that then. I know there was one of the previous things we talked about, having a deeper conversation with AMHO about the right to purchase legislation. If this might be a part of that conversation too. People have other thoughts. Yeah. I know there were some other policy pieces too from the last meeting that we didn't bring into this meeting because there were so many ideas of potential next steps. But it seemed like one of the priorities for a next meeting topic would be this focus on policy change and what it would take to make that happen. I think if you can move to the next slide, Elise. Oh, expanding low-income assistance to master meter customers. And want to drop that.
Everything, yep, everything regular customers have, we should have too.
And one of the next steps that the subgroup had talked about was talking with Southwest Gas. I've been trying to get in touch with them for quite a while, and did meet with their government rep. And we had a few meetings, but he didn't know the logistics of how the program actually worked. And it's been many months where he still hasn't connected me with that person. I'm happy to keep trying there, but wonder if anyone else might be willing to try to talk to Southwest Gas as well. See your hand, Elise. Great. And I think that is, going to the next slide. Any other ideas there about expanding low-income assistance?
I'm just curious if like providing more assistance to master metered companies has been, I've only attended one of the TEP energy agreement meetings, but I'm curious if that's been part of the discussion in the negotiations in terms of renewing their agreement with the city. I don't know if anyone has been, unfortunately Karina is gone now, so.
Sorry, what was the question?
The question was if in the conversations with TEP about renewing their agreement, I don't think I'm using quite the right word. Have there been any discussions about providing more assistance to master metered indirect customers, such as those in manufactured home parks?
Are you referencing the franchise agreement?
Yeah.
No, my understanding is the franchise agreement is strictly focused on right-of-way usage.
Okay.
Has the franchise agreement already been approved?
No, and so there's that's the other thing it's in conversations also. And I don't know if you all watched the latest mayor and council meeting, but the vote was postponed. Mayor and council initially put a placeholder for a November election, and that was taken out. So in the future, that item would have to come back in so I can provide updates then.
Thanks,
Near
Fatima.
future, I should say.
I know that's been a huge task for you guys, so I appreciate all the work you guys have done on that.
Thank you.
Can you explain that one more time? You said that for the November election?
Yes, so when was it? I think in April, mayor and council had put a placeholder because it is the mayor and the council that calls the election. And so they put a placeholder on the election for November. But prior to that, you do need language at least 4 months before. And so because in addition to the franchise, mayor and council asked staff to also get input on a parallel energy collaboration agreement with TEP. There just wasn't enough time to get everything done. And so in the last mayor and council meeting, they removed the placeholder from the election in November. And so it's gonna take longer. And I don't know how much longer. The franchise expires in April 2026, and there is a 1-year provision in which the utility can still operate for a year. But my understanding is that ideally they would want a renewed agreement and not having to use that provision. So there's more conversations pending, I would say. The election is no longer happening in November.
Thank you.
Of course.
Is there still much conversation about the city taking over the electrical utility?
So there was a study that was done for providing information to mayor and council on the different options that the city have to advance carbon neutrality goals. And so that was presented, the final report was presented to mayor and council. And so they have that information. They have the results. And essentially it would be up to them to decide whether or not they would want to go that route. That it's not an easy undertaking. It would likely take, many years. And so that's the idea of having these other parallel agreements, because even if that was something that mayor and council would want to pursue, it would likely take like 10 years or so. So having solutions in the near term, it's what mayor and council are exploring through these parallel agreement.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I see in the chat, Monica wrote that it's important to know how they have the contracts and how they can make for each house to have its individual meter, so that para que los de la luz manden directamente. So that is that the los de la luz, or so that the electric company can send directly the receipts. No sé si entendí eso bien. I'll say that in English, just because you're in the Spanish room. But so that the electric company can send the receipts directly to the customer, Monica? Or so that the mobile home park can send them directly the receipt?
Sí. Sí, porque es una manera como las personas que no tenemos el control de cuánto gastamos ni cuánto es lo que se paga en realidad, de estar seguros de lo que uno está gastando. Y al menos la comunidad o la familia se sentiría más seguras estando así, porque ahorita hay una inquietud de no saber cuánto es lo que uno consume y quiere hacer uno un ahorro o gastar menos luz y llega a la misma cantidad o llega más alta. Entonces, voy a hablar por mí, ¿no? En el verano sé que va a subir por el calor, pero yo estoy trabajando la mayor parte del día afuera y están mis hijos conmigo. Entonces, estoy gastando lo mismo, aunque estuviera yo en casa, y no estoy en casa y no estoy utilizando la luz. Entonces, no nada más soy yo, somos muchas familias que están pasando por lo mismo. Y cuando se corta la luz y se va, de todos modos nos cobran eso a nosotros, aunque estemos horas sin luz. Entonces, es parte de eso, ¿no? También.
With the existing laws that we have, it seems like that might be something for an attorney general complaint too, saying both that the utility is not reliable and that they're not giving an itemized bill. Is that right? Thoughts on that, Frank, or others?
La factura a veces no, nada más no se entiende, no se sabe en realidad cuánto es el que se gasta. No vienen los números, no sabe, uno ignora la cantidad, nada más viene cuánto es lo que vas a pagar. Así son 200, $300, eso es lo que tú vas a pagar. Entonces, en sí no te...
Maybe that's exactly what we were talking about earlier in terms of the education materials. Since it does seem that what's happening in your park is not in compliance with the law, it might be a good park to do some of that know your rights training with the materials that will be prepared. So Judith, I saw you put in the chat, wondering if you want to come off mute and ask your question out loud. or Ray. I'm not sure, Judith, if you can come off mute. Ray, I see you also made a response in the chat. If you'd like to explain that.
Sure. My understanding is, for traditional discounts, what has been the $20 a month. Oh, what has been the $20 discount? They have to be grandfathered in, so it's a park by park basis. But for LIHEAP, we've been able to help people 60 and over apply because they provide their bank account positive, but they have to provide that documentation of the payment ledger from the park that demonstrates that they did pay for their utilities.
Okay, and we have about 12 minutes left. Is there one more slide in this section? Oh, that there's no licensing process. And I see a comment about the interpreter not being here. I wonder if are other English speakers getting an interpreter? Okay, it might have you in the wrong channel then. Is that still happening?
I'm not sure. I think maybe not. I don't know what was going on.
Okay. If we want to open up space for, we've talked about a lot of next steps here, but of who wants to do what too. I know we had a few people volunteer for a few things of other priorities for the next meeting and action items that we might take between now and then. Right now I have Kim Lucas is going to set up a meeting with the California folks. I think Andrew's going to talk with the people in Colorado, and that is it Alan and Frank and Amho and Poder Casas Mobiles among us may talk about setting up some training materials to be able to use for Know Your Rights. Other thoughts of next steps that people would like to be involved in?
What do people think about putting together some type of like survey type thing with all of these different, I don't know exactly how it would be formatted, but all of these different like opportunities, these different potential solutions and like how they might be pursued, and doing some like ranking or commenting on them, just kind of getting an idea of what people think overall about what priorities are and what's feasible. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I would be happy to give it a whirl in like Google Sheets or something like that, or Google Forms, if people think it might be valuable.
Move forward on priorities identify. See that your comment there, Elaine, and Monica saying yes, that would be very helpful. Does anyone have a priority thing? Oh yeah, see a comment too about the next meeting is scheduled for July 24th. If we want to be in person or online for that? And have hybrid if okay.
Online is my preference.
Mhm.
I could second the online as well. I like getting together in person, I do, but eliminating the drive really helps my schedule.
Mhm.
I have an office retreat that day, so July 24th, I'm not available.
Okay. I see mostly virtual comments. Maybe we could make at least maybe the September meeting in person. We did the next last through the summer virtual. Okay, we see all online preferred. I think we initially talked about doing maybe a quarterly in person. That still sounds good to folks. Excellent. So we'll plan July and August online. Is there anything else, especially for folks who haven't gotten a chance to speak today, of priorities that we're missing, or ways that people would like to be engaged with moving these next steps forward, or priorities for our next meeting topic too?
Could you say that date again?
The next is July 24th.
Oh, okay, for the planning, and then the meeting's the 26th?
I
No.
think the actual meeting is
Oh,
the
the actual
24th.
meeting, okay.
Yeah. Hmm?
We gonna meet before then or no?
We usually do meet before. If anyone else wants to be a part of the planning meeting, if you want to drop a note in the chat, I will make sure to include you in a planning meeting before that date. Where we'll kind of distill some of the notes that we already took and some of those next steps and look at action items. For the next meeting, there's a few options of things we could talk about. We could continue to talk about following up on the topics from this meeting. We could have a policy focused conversation. I know that was brought up before too. And the topic that we didn't get to today was about the home repair programs as well. Does anyone want to voice opinions of what you'd like to talk about for our July meeting? What area of focus you think makes the most sense?
I'd like to, they're all important. I'd like to hear about all of them, but especially to touch on the home repair, home improvement work. So.
Anyone else want to voice your opinion? Okay,
I'm curious what some of the home repair weatherization people who are still in the room might think about doing a meeting that's focused on those surveys.
One of the things I think that's a policy issue that we may know more about is the impact of the federal budget talks that right now, for example, LIHEAP is gone entirely. Utility assistance as a program has been cut from the budget, the federal budget. There are no There are, just like Medicaid's been cut, utility assistance as a program has been cut. All utility assistance has been cut. So there may be a number of sort of larger budget issues at the federal level that affect local services to mobile home parks and every other sector.
Pima County Home Repair here. We're happy to speak to this from our perspective next time. Just possibly a clarification, the proposed budget for next year has a number of items zeroed out, but that's unlikely to happen. And currently we're not expecting or experiencing any real cuts in our funding for home repair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe we could take the first part of the next meeting then to follow up with anyone who's made next steps happen between now and then, and dedicate a large chunk of the meeting to talking through home repair. Maybe we'll have an update from price by then as well, since that will be a major factor in home repair.
Yeah.
Would anyone else like to share anything before we close this meeting?
I just want to confirm what I'm going to do in California, and I can't find the notes here.
I think that you're going to talk to the people in California who organized the program to convert to direct utility customers.
Okay.
And Yana, I'm not sure if you're still on, if you might be able to help with contacts for that, if you have any.
Yeah, I've only been in touch with the PTO side, but I'll send those to Kim with the folks there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nada más para confirmar bien, ¿verdad que el 24 y lo que es en julio y agosto va a ser por Zoom?
Sí, julio y agosto, los dos va a ser por Zoom. July 24th will be on Zoom, as well as the August meeting is August 28th. And those will both be on Zoom. And the September meeting will be in person. Gracias. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And again, I can't actually see the last messages. My computer's not allowing me to see them. But if someone can note of, is anyone's noting that they'd like to come to the planning meeting too, we will have a planning meeting in a couple weeks to plan the next one.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, everyone. And if you haven't read Yana's article, it's great.
Where is that article?
It is. Okay.
I was late coming here, so if it was discussed before I got on.
I'll drop it in the chat again, unless you have it there, Yana.
I'm gonna try to pull it up. I don't.
Awesome.
But could find it. Cool. And as goes for everything, like even if anyone has like any small win or really anything like that they're interested in getting more information out about, just be in touch.
I dropped it in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. See you next time. Gracias.